Hey guys, Paul Warburg back in Utah today. Thought I'd have a little firewall filming today because I think you'll find that as today's video progresses, things are going to heat up in more ways than just one. Today I want to talk about whether or not the war in Ukraine is heating up based on recent escalations that you've no doubt heard about. Most people by now know that last week, President Biden gave Ukraine some permissions that they have been waiting for a long time, allowing Ukraine to use US provided missiles to strike targets on Russian territory. And in response to this, Russia has been heating things up a little bit on their side as well, where Russia has launched the first ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile, against an actual enemy target in military history. It's something that's never been done before, and that has a lot of people nervous. And as this is heating up, what you'll see is that the political rhetoric back home in the United States and also in Europe is heating up as well. Just as an example, I have seen dozens of articles and too many posts to count in recent weeks accusing President Biden of intentionally trying to start World War III by escalating the war in Ukraine before Donald Trump takes office. The implication is that the timing of the things that are going on is not because of a military strategic purpose, but rather because of a political purpose, basically to hand Donald Trump a poisoned chalice and prevent him from ending the war. And the concern on top of that is that the recent actions, especially around US missiles striking Russia and Russia launching ICBMs, has a lot of doom and gloom and foreboding that could lead to a World War III type scenario. So what I want to do in today's video is examine these types of claims and others like them and demonstrate why they're actually not true. And I want to do that from a couple of different angles. First, I want to show why the war in Ukraine is not at a point where it can actually be escalated in the way that people are worrying about. Second, I want to show that even if it was at such a point, everything we know about the Biden administration shows that they would not make such a decision to escalate the war on purpose. And then third, I want to demonstrate where the source of a lot of this political rhetoric comes. So hopefully we can kind of just stop doing this or stop falling for this kind of stuff if it ever happens again in the future. So let's start with this idea that now that US missiles are striking Russian territory proper, that Russia might somehow do something to escalate the war. And I want to do this analysis on two legs. First, I want to talk about conventional escalation, and I want to talk about nuclear escalation. Let's start with conventional escalation. A lot of discussions that I have heard about this topic have betrayed that the people having the discussions and the very strong opinions haven't actually been paying attention to the war in Ukraine. Because a lot of people seem terrified that now that Western weapons are striking Russian territory, Russia will respond with a conventional military escalation by somehow ramping up the threat on the ground in Ukraine, or even ramping up the threats against like the Baltic states or Poland by striking targets on their territory. The idea is that US missiles and other missiles from France and Britain pass through these countries' territory to get to Ukraine, and Russia might be tempted to take out logistical hubs in some of these countries and basically directly attack a NATO country in response to NATO weapons landing on Russian territory. Now, if you have been paying attention to the war, you should know that this is a rather ludicrous idea and nothing to be concerned about. Because bluntly stated, if Russia was able to conduct a conventional escalation, they already would have done so. And in fact, they have been trying to do so for the past 3 years. What we have seen is that Russia has basically brought to bear all of the military equipment that they possibly can, and that they've even tried to mobilize parts of their economy to produce more military equipment because they are running out so quickly. And to this point, Russia has not been able to keep up with the demands of the battlefield. They've been able to make small territorial gains in Ukraine, but always at extremely high costs, and never at a cost where they could, if they wanted to, just add more resources and push through Ukraine easily, let alone potentially start a conflict with any other country, especially a NATO country. So right off the bat, we know that just looking at the situation on the ground, Russia is in no hurry to start World War III or to escalate things conventionally, because bluntly, if Russia did that, they would be crushed very, very quickly. So as far as a conventional military escalation by Russia, that is off the table, and everybody should know that. I mean, I'm not sharing any new information here. I'm just sharing this for the thoroughness of the analysis here. And Russia knows this more than anybody. They know that if a conventional military escalation were to happen, Russia would lose in that situation because Russia has not even been able to defeat Ukraine conventionally. So with that in mind, we then ask the question, well, what about potential nuclear escalation? Could Russia feel so backed into a corner that they now decide to use nuclear missiles against a Western nation? And I want to say that if you actually just think about this for more than about 2 seconds, it should be pretty obvious to you that the answer to that is no. I want to pose it to you this way. What does Russia not want to happen, which is why they're making their nuclear threats? What Russia does not want to happen is for Western conventional missiles to strike Russian territory. Because Russia is terrified that if Western conventional missiles strike Russian territory, that could create a situation for them that makes their campaign and their lifestyle no longer viable. So if that is what Russia is trying so hard to prevent, why on earth would Russia launch a nuclear missile and by doing so create the parameters where they would be guaranteed to have Western nuclear missiles strike their territory and only accentuate by 1,000 times all of the things they're scared of and are trying to prevent? Just by posing it that way, it's pretty obvious that Russia is bluffing. That in mind, let me also pose this to you another way. Russia will not escalate to nuclear warfare right now because to do so would simply not be in Russia's advantage. It wouldn't help them achieve their actual goals, which would be to take and keep more of Ukraine's territory. Russia, there is no scenario for them where using a nuclear weapon helps them accomplish that. And so for them, the math of risk is that nuclear weapons equal chance of total destruction, no chance of actually achieving our goals. So therefore, by that math also, there's basically no actual risk of nuclear escalation here. According to Russia's previous threats, when the US allowed their missiles to strike Russian territory, Russia probably should have responded with nuclear aggression. But that's not what Russia did. They responded by launching an intercontinental ballistic missile without a nuclear warhead to show how serious they were. But the reality is that if Russia were serious about their threats, they would have already carried out their threats. And I compare this to like a principal who keeps threatening that they're going to expel a student if they keep doing this bad thing. And the student does the bad thing multiple more times, and the principal just keeps giving them detention. At some point, the student figures out that the expulsion is never going to happen, and that it's not a real threat because the principal doesn't want to actually do it for whatever reason. That is what's currently going on with Russia and the nuclear threats. They keep making more and more threats, they keep changing the threats or raising the threats or whatever, but they never carry them out. And that shows you everything you need to know about the veracity and the truthfulness of those threats. Now, I could do entire other videos, and I already have like a 20-minute documentary on the Icarus project on why Russia's nuclear threats probably shouldn't be taken nearly as seriously as they are. But the short answer is that Russia has nothing to gain tactically by actually using a nuclear missile. But they do have a lot to gain tactically by threatening to use nuclear missiles, because that threat might scare people into inaction and cause them to not take steps that could actually lead to the defeat of Russia on the battlefield in Ukraine. So that brings us back then to the topic of today's video at hand. I've already covered why an escalation probably isn't possible. Now I want to talk about why an escalation isn't probable, and it almost certainly isn't Biden's goal. What's interesting is that for people who have followed the war in Ukraine for more than about 2 weeks since the last US presidential election, it's actually pretty well known that people who follow the war in Ukraine have been pretty frustrated with the Biden administration for a reason that is the opposite of the current accusations that are being leveled against them. Since the war in Ukraine began, people have been frustrated by the Biden administration's inaction. Not by their action, but by their inaction. Basically based on their historical fear of the kind of nuclear threats that we've just discussed. The Biden administration, if you were to actually study what they've done throughout the past 3 years, and not just the past 3 weeks, could be characterized as extremely cowardly if you wanted to level a criticism. And what's interesting is that even at the beginning of the war, some of the people who are now criticizing Biden of being overly aggressive leveled the criticism against Biden that he was too much of a coward. For example, Donald Trump criticized Biden early on that he was being a coward for not implementing a no-fly zone over Ukraine and for not getting military support to Ukraine quick enough. His tune quickly changed later as the Biden administration started giving Ukraine more support. One of the things that shows that political commentary is often not based on the action itself, but rather based on the fact that there is always something to profit by portraying your opponent as an imbecile and by portraying whatever action your political opponent takes as the wrong action. So if you look at what's happening now, what you will notice is that a lot of people who have been serious analysts of the war in Ukraine are now praising Biden for finally taking action where they used to criticize him. But on the flip side, a lot of people who haven't been following the war in Ukraine are now criticizing Biden's actions, not because of the actions themselves, but because if you look at these people's platforms, their entire brand and the way they make their living is by criticizing every decision that the Biden administration or whatever Democratic administration is in power makes. Now, this, of course, isn't limited to these people. Plenty of people do this on the other side as well. And it can be kind of frustrating for those of us who sit in the middle politically to try to figure out what the truth actually is behind all the political rhetoric. And so to demonstrate how we can kind of get past that, I wanted to introduce the sponsor of today's video, which is Ground News, which I have been using to help me research videos like these and hopefully arrive at a more balanced and objective conclusion. Ground News, what it does is it gathers related articles from around the world in one place so you can compare how different outlets are covering the same story. And that's always interesting. You know, with each outlet, they show context about the source of the information and whether the outlet has a political bias, how reliable their reporting practices are, and who owns them, things like that. So in this article in particular, what we see here is that in the right-leaning coverage, the headlines tend towards the idea that Trump will end the war, while on the left-leaning outlets, we will find coverage stating how the war cannot be stopped overnight. And in center-leaning headlines, we predominantly find themes of let's wait and see, or this casts some doubts. So those are obviously 30 different narratives, which probably aren't surprising for my viewers, but it's always a good source to have something like Ground News to quickly compare different news sources. So Ground News is a platform I enjoy using. It helps me create my videos primarily by exposing me to all sides of a narrative in one quick and easy place. And Ground News is also the sponsor of today's video. So if you want to check it out, if you subscribe through my link, ground.news/Paul, or scan my QR code on screen, you'll get 50% off the Vantage plan, which is what I use to get unlimited access to all the features. And right now it's the holiday, so it's the biggest sale of the year. And that's only available for a limited time. So I hope you'll check them out. But pivoting back to our narrative at hand, obviously this narrative about Biden trying to start World War III is just another example of this highly politicized rhetoric. So with all that in mind, we now have to ask the question, if Biden isn't giving Ukraine this permission to try to start World War III, then why is he doing it now? He sat around and waited this long. Why give Ukraine permission now, as he's about to step out of office and Donald Trump is about to step into office? And the reason I would say actually has to do with what anybody could know if they studied the Biden administration's approach to this war. And it actually goes back to Biden's greatest weakness. He is risk averse to a fault. And it's pretty obvious that Biden does not want to do anything in Ukraine that is going to risk a provocation or an escalation. And I actually think that's why Biden has chosen this timing. By choosing this time period between when he is about to get out of office and Trump is about to come in, he basically gives Ukraine a period in time to use these missiles and to conduct these strikes where Russia can't really retaliate back. Because very soon a new administration is going to come in that Russia is hoping will be a little bit more favorable to them, at least in terms of negotiating an end to the war, which Russia wants so that they can regroup and build up forces. Russia doesn't want to risk that, and so it makes it a period where actually, rather than trying to provoke World War III, Biden is trying to give Ukraine every advantage they can get without causing World War III in the short term. Another reason that Biden might be giving Ukraine this permission right now is that leading up to this, Russia was building up a lot of troops in the Kursk region of Russia, trying to take this territory that Ukraine has occupied in Russia back from the Ukrainians before Trump gets into office, so that if a peace deal begins to get negotiated, Russia will be in a stronger position. And so Biden could be giving Ukraine this permission to strike these targets now so that Ukraine can hold on to this piece of territory and be in a better negotiating position so that if the war does end, it will end in terms that are more favorable to Ukraine. So there's just a couple of options, and neither of them are Biden wants to cause World War III so that Trump doesn't get what he wants, as if they're just immature children on the playground. Although, to be fair, that is a lot of what we've seen in the political spectrum for the past 8 years or so. So that's it for today, guys. I hope you got something useful out of today's video. Hopefully it wasn't too political for you. I wasn't trying to be super political. I was actually trying to show the biases of commentators so that we can arrive at the right political answers, whatever side we might be on. Because whatever political side of the spectrum we're on, what we should all be interested in is not winning the argument, but actually having the right answer. And we can't get to the right answer if we're so focused on winning the argument that we just make up rhetoric and attack other people so that we can never make any progress. If you guys enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.